Hello, everybody. My name is Danielle Posa. I am the founder of Workplace Wellbeing Advisors, and I will be leading this conversation called "Identifying and Combating Employee Burnout in the Hybrid World." So, thank you for having me, and I hope this provides some value to you. So just a quick background on me. I've been in the space of workplace well-being for a long time. I'm extremely passionate about this subject. I started I always say my real career at Gallup as a management consultant. But I left there about 10 years ago to really focus on this topic in particular. And I work primarily with organizations all around the world at more of a leadership executive level to help them with creating overall well-being strategies for their organization that really become part of their culture. My philosophy really is that well-being shouldn't be a program at this point. It's really something that is here to stay. So therefore, it needs to become a strategic priority for organizations and really something that you're thinking about over the long term. So I want to start at a high level of just talking about the overall influence. It's important that when we think about burnout, we first understand the substantial influence that work is having in our lives. I've always believed, and I've always been passionate about working with workplaces because our place of work is a vehicle for changing people's lives, right? So if we really think about the power of a workplace, it's where we're spending the majority of our time and therefore our life. I mean, it's where it's what and often where, as we return to the office, we spend the majority of our daily life, and therefore spend the most of our attention, and that culminates into the overall total amount of our life. So we have to realize the enormous impact that it's having. Second, it's connected to our identity as human beings. So if you actually look at research on well-being around the world, your work is having the biggest influence on your life, in part because of the way it's connected to our identity. It's often one of the first ways that we introduce ourselves, by saying what we do for work. It's what gives us our sense of self and sense of self-worth. It also provides us with the means to support ourselves and our families. And this is what I just mentioned, is that work is actually proven by research to be the single biggest driver of our overall well-being. But then the thing to think about is, if it's the biggest influencer or driver of our overall well-being, is that influence a positive or negative one? And that's kind of the issue that we're facing in today's world, is really putting work through this magnifying glass to say, well, if work is this powerful, are we actually influencing employees' lives for the better or for the worse? So I want to kind of start by distinguishing what it looks like when work is having that positive influence, and what we should be really aiming for as organizations, versus when it's having the negative. So when work is having a positive influence on our life, it's really makes us feel empowered, because we love what we're doing. We're getting recognition for what we're doing. We feel like we're doing maybe what we were meant to do, something that lights us up, gives us a sense of purpose. It also means that the work is giving us opportunities to learn and grow and develop as human beings. It is enabling us to achieve our goals, not just our professional goals, but maybe our life goals, because of the nature of the work. It's empowering us financially. It's giving us the means to support our families and live comfortably without financial stress. It provides a supportive community of people. This is a key one, especially as we're thinking about the hybrid work environments. That sense of community is so important, and often many people are looking to work to provide that. And when it's having a positive influence, our work gives us a sense of pride. It makes us feel good that we're, part of that organization, or we feel pride, in the actual nature of the work that we do. And last but not least, it's giving us it's actually enabling us to live out our potential and purpose. So like when I think of organizations that truly have an amazing culture and are being run the right way, they're looking at it as the workplace being a place for employees to actually live out their potential, which is an amazing thing. So this is kind of what we're aiming for when work has a positive influence. When it's having and that guy clearly is enjoying his work. When work is having a negative influence, though, it's actually draining us of our physical and emotional energy, right? So people aren't just exhausted physically because of the number of hours they're putting in these days, but there's often this emotional energy that people are losing because if they're not in work that they're enjoying. So when work's having a negative influence, it's draining us of the physical emotional energy. It starts becoming our main source of stress and anxiety. It becomes all consuming and therefore prevents us from actually living a well-balanced life, and it prevents us from focusing on personal priorities. And then it often comes into direct conflict with those personal and family priorities. And it does the opposite of what I said before. It actually erodes our sense of identity and self-worth. And ultimately, it actually prevents us from achieving our personal and professional goals. So clearly, we do not want to, fall into that category. So the big problem right now in today's world is that the workplace is no longer having a positive influence on people's lives for the majority of people. So this means that we need to kind of have this wake up call, because we are experiencing truly a well-being crisis. And work is actually one of the driving forces of that crisis. Now, the reason why I say a well-being crisis, I say that for a reason and not just a mental health crisis. I say well-being because we have very few people that are really truly thriving in their lives, and they're falling somewhere else on the well-being spectrum. Either they're falling into a mental ill health category, or they're in this category, which I'll mention in a second, called languishing, where they're just really not, they just feel lost, really just not feeling good, or people are burnt out. So we have all different aspects where people are just not thriving. They're just not fully well in their lives. And that's a crisis, because we have this issue of people not necessarily knowing, what they want or what's important to them, or not getting that from work primarily. So if we look just at a high level, stress, worry, and sadness are on the rise. This is a graph from the Gallup Global Emotions Report, which is actually a pretty shocking graph. So what this is showing is the way Gallup measures negative emotions around the world. They ask people in over 150 countries how much stress, worry, sadness, fear they're feeling on any given day. And as you can see, this really spiked up through the pandemic, but it's not just from the pandemic. This has been the case. Stress, worry, and sadness have really been on the rise for basically since, as you can see, 2014 here. So we have to say how much of this is due to work. Then we also are seeing that the majority of employees are languishing. Languishing basically means that they lack real engagement in their work. They lack a sense of purpose. They're really just kind of going through the motions, relatively bored of what they do, and therefore on the road to resignation. We hear this term quiet quitting all the time. So quiet quitters are falling into this category of languishing. And what that sounds like is, these people are just thinking to themselves, I'd rather do something else, and I just don't know what it is, or I'm comfortable what I'm doing, but I'm just not excited about work. It's not love, it's not hate. I'm just basically grateful to have a job. So these people are kind of just resigned and just showing up to work. Now, often companies think that, if they have engaged employees, that, that's that's enough to kind of get employees out of the rut, or to be kind of a thriving workplace, but it's not. So despite the fact that engagement has been on the rise around the world, only a small percentage are actually engaged and thriving. So what that means is that when this comes from Gallup as well, when they measure, the percentage of employees that are engaged in their work, meaning that they use their strengths every day, they feel an emotional connection to their work. And when they measure well-being, when they ask people how satisfied they are with their overall lives and ask them questions about their physical, health and their social well-being and these other categories, there's a very few amount of people that are actually both engaged and thriving. And what it shows is that only 12% of employees who were engaged were also thriving. Now that was from 2013. I believe the percentage is actually smaller now. Now, the last bullet is probably the most important here. Employees who are engaged but not thriving are then actually more likely to be stressed, worried, sad, or angry. So to kind of put it more in layman's terms, a lot of the times, highly engaged employees are top performers. They love what they do. They do want to keep working. They want to show the organization that they're committed. And as a result, those are the people that can get burnt out. So this just kind of makes the case for why engagement and well-being need to go hand in hand, especially if you're going to try to solve the burnout issue. You cannot solve burnout just by looking at engagement. So now moving on to burnout, the first thing I always like to do is define burnout, because one thing that drives me crazy is when burnout gets used interchangeably with mental ill health or depression or anxiety or stress. Those can all be kind of symptoms of burnout. But burnout is a work-related phenomenon. It's a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. The reason why that's so important is because the way that you handle, mental ill health or some of these other kind of wellness or well-being issues that are more just related to an employee and their life, that's very different than burnout, which is often contributed, the workplace is often contributing to that person's burnout. It's not just about, helping the employee. The workplace is responsible for it. So burnout has to be treated very differently than giving people mental health resources. Okay, so it's very important to understand the definition. It's characterized by three things, which is and this isn't my definition. These three come from, various research studies on the definition of burnout. It's a loss of overall energy, which is it's physical and emotional energy, a loss of enthusiasm in one's job, just no longer being excited about what someone does, and then a loss of confidence. So there's that identity that I mentioned earlier, that sense of self that actually starts to erode. So from this Gallup study in 2019, it said from over 12,000 employees, 76% of employees experience burnout on the job at least sometimes. So you could see 7% say always, which is just crazy, because if you just think of even 7% of that number, that there is that many people experiencing burnout day in and day out, just truly like suffering. 21% saying very often, and then a whole 48% saying sometimes. Even sometimes is too much. It's not fair to people. We have to get this under control. But here's what the real problem is. And this is understanding where the real problem lies is what will enable you to truly tackle burnout. The real problem is that organizations are trying to fix burnout the wrong way. So they're basically just trying to give employees solutions or quick fixes, making it like it's the employee's problem to solve, but that, as an organization, we're going to help you by giving you some of these solutions or programs or apps, right? Or organizations are kind of expecting employees to, just say no, telling employees it's okay to just tell us that you can't do something. But that doesn't work either, because a lot of employees, especially lower level employees, do not have the confidence to say that and set those boundaries. Or they encourage them to carve out time they'll say, carve out time to meditate, carve out some time for yourself to find some, self-care time. Or they say, we're giving you unlimited PTO. That doesn't work either, because often that's just kind of this background policy that doesn't really get enforced. People don't really get encouraged to take their time off. And then they really just, they actually end up, I think statistically, actually, they end up taking off less time than if there's a more specific PTO policy. Or they try to blame it on employees being high performers or self-critical. This is the one that drives me the most crazy, because if an employee is a high performer, yes, that might actually exacerbate the burnout, but that is not at the root cause of somebody's burnout, because a high performer has the ability to be completely effective and to be completely well. If anything, they might have even more ability to be fully well, but so blaming it on that is not where the issue lies. So what is it? Oh, wait. So before I get to that. So, and then when you ask employees about their burnout, I've done a lot of employee interviews on behalf of clients to understand their stories and what they're dealing with. And here's what they say, while employees are trying to kind of provide them with solutions, they say things like, oh, well, sure, it would be nice to meditate if I actually had the time to do it. Or, I feel guilty about taking time for myself. Or I feel guilty if I'm not responsive enough to my email. It's that feeling of guilt. Or they say, well, I don't want to appear to be weak or uncommitted to my work. And then they say things like, well, I don't even, my workload is so extreme that I don't have time. I don't even have time to do my laundry on the weekend. And I feel like I can never have a family because I can never sustain this workload. So a lot of these burnout, quotes are kind of attributed to just like these high job demands that they're experiencing. So what are the real causes of burnout? They're not, like I said, they're not because people are high performers. The real causes of burnout are elements of poor culture. So this is super important to understand. These causes that I'm going to mention come from, I've looked at a variety of some of the best research on the world, from Gallup to McKinsey, to put together my kind of short list of the causes. At a micro level, like at the team level, the root causes of burnout are having job demands that are way too overwhelming, never feeling like you can get ahead of your workload, having low job control, feeling like you're always being micromanaged or watched, or that your process is being dictated by your manager. And third is lack of support, especially from one's manager. So when you don't feel like you can ask for help, or that you can ask even from your, team members, get the resources that you need, or get supportive training, all those things can contribute to burnout, because that's where kind of the emotional toll, that's where it takes an emotional toll, when you feel exhausted because you keep making mistakes and you're not able to get the support that you need. On a macro level, organizationally, burnout is contributed by unfairness, being treated unfairly in the workplace, whether that's due to race, ethnicity, or even small, more, should say micro things, I guess, like just, being bullied, or comments being made to you that were just uncalled for. So any sense of unfairness erodes people's sense of self-worth and contributes to the burnout. Fifth is a cultural misalignment. So feeling like, you joined a job because you were excited about maybe the mission, or excited about what you were kind of the work that you were going to do. And then finding out when you get there, the culture is just not what it, was cracked up to be, that it actually doesn't align with your values. And then day in and day out, there's kind of a feeling of that you don't belong, or that you don't want to be at the organization, and it eats away at people. 6 is a sense of job insecurity. So despite the fact that we're seeing that employees kind of have the upper hand in today's market, part of the reason why they leave jobs is because they still feel a sense of insecurity. Organizations aren't investing enough in their training or giving them the recognition that they deserve, and not making them feel like they are really they are really there to stay. But so any sense of job insecurity, or seeing people leave, or people being laid off, makes people feel uneasy, and therefore contributes to the sense of like chronic stress and uneasiness in the workplace. So the important thing in this hybrid environment is that these issues are only further exacerbated by remote work. So the cause, fixing burnout is really a systemic thing that, regardless of whether you're in the office or not, these things have to be addressed. But remote work only makes it harder and exacerbates these things, because people are operating more so in a silo. It's harder for them to get that support that they need. It's harder for them to feel appreciated, and get that, that sense of community from their jobs. So all of this really starts with asking the right question. The question isn't, how do we help our employees? Because it's not their problem to solve. The question is really, where is our organization responsible for the burnout? And then asking yourselves, are we willing to truly take responsibility for the suffering that has caused? Are we truly and authentically interested in enabling employees to thrive? Are we interested in figuring out what it takes, to help them thrive? And are we committed to doing what's truly right for people, not just what is going to improve retention, but what's truly right for people? And are we willing to do what it takes? Are we willing to invest the time, the energy, the resources into truly building a culture of well-being? So if the answer to that is yes, then the next question is, well, then what is the sustainable solution? If we do want to roll up our sleeves and kind of create something long-term, what is that sustainable solution? How do we kind of fix burnout for the long haul? So the first thing that I always tell people and my clients is that you've got to have a meaningful dialogue with your leadership team. Call a meeting, a well-being and burnout meeting, whatever you want to call it, and actually sit around a table and ask each other these questions, and just start to kind of bring some of the maybe the elephant in the room of burnout to the limelight here. So asking one another, how burned out do we really think our people are? And getting a sense around the room, how would they answer that question? And then asking, well, what do we think is the root cause of that, right? Or where do we think our organization is responsible, right? Not allowing for those other comments to be made that, oh, our people just need to learn to say no. No, really looking at what is the root cause. You can pull up the list of causes that I just shared with you, put that on the table and say, which of these do we feel that our organization really needs to work on the most? Then ask, how do we think our employees are doing just overall in well-being, in all areas of well-being? How do we think they're doing just physically, socially, emotionally? And then saying, well, do we even have measures, a way of measuring burnout or well-being in our organization? This is one of the first things I recommend for my clients to do, is to make sure you're putting the right measurement in place for well-being, because then after that, you have to be committed to it because you're measuring it. So, ask, do we have any ways of measuring that? Bring to the forefront maybe that you don't have a way of measuring it. And then asking, well, are we really ready to make well-being a leadership strategy? Because some of these questions might prompt you to want to do something quickly. But before you do that, you should really ask, well, wait a minute, are we actually like ready to really do this right and make this a true part of our strategy? Now I put a link here. I have a snapshot assessment that I've developed for organizations. You can go in on my website, and it's a 20-question assessment similar to questions like these that will give you a score. And that's something that you can actually use and have your other leadership team take the assessment too, to get a sense of where do you all think, how do you all think your well-being is, and you can actually print that out and use that in a meeting. So that's there for you as a resource. So then you have that conversation, and if your organization is willing to do what it takes and develop that leadership strategy, it's going to require the following. First, it's going to require an honest, hard look at your culture. Second, a real commitment from the CEO. So I truly believe that there's got to be commitment from the CEO, not just the C-suite. There's got to be a vision that inspires the organization, where you come out of the gate with this saying, look, we want to make well-being a core value within our organization. And here's what we envision for us. Here's what we want. We want our employees to thrive. Here's what we want it to look, feel like here in 5 or 10 years time. There needs to be involvement across all departments of the organization, because training and development, should be involved, and benefits should be involved. And there needs to be proper measurement of well-being, a sufficient budget for it, accountability, meaning a real team dedicated to the effort, maybe a chief well-being officer, and then that long-term well-being culture strategy. So again, I know this feels like a lot, but this is really what's entailed. This is really what's involved when you want to solve that retention issue for the long term, because there's plenty of statistics that show that as much as people think that employees are leaving because they're just getting, higher compensation, the thing that makes people stay is culture. So this is really a culture strategy with well-being as an underpin. So now I want to just show you the building blocks of a workplace well-being culture strategy. So this is kind of my process that I work with clients on. And as we go through this, you'll see that it's a cycle for a reason, because it really is a work in progress. And this is not a strategy that's meant to be implemented in 12 months. It's really strategy that's meant to be at least a 3 to 5 year strategy. So the first phase is to build, lay the foundation. I'm going to go through these in detail in a second. The second is educate. Third, evaluate, eradicate, and then empower. So let me just break these down. So the first part, and I would say this usually takes, kind of 3-4 months in and of itself, is that you've got to build a really great business case for well-being and burnout within your organization. A business case that then you can bring to your leadership team. If you are in an HR role and you want to get the attention of your execs, you build this business case. I usually work with clients to make that business case actually customized, meaning that you're not just showing the research behind why it's important to get rid of burnout and to focus on well-being, but thinking about what are some of the pain points that your organization is facing specifically, and really kind of tailor it to the organization to make it as compelling as possible. The build phase also involves really building a team of well-being champions, finding the individuals throughout your organization that are excited about well-being, and then building that accountability team as well, and taking the time to really put together a thoughtful strategy. Once you do that, the next part is to educate the organization. So one of the mistakes I think that companies make too is they kind of jump in wanting to, roll something out quickly and roll out some kind of program without taking some time to actually align the organization on core concepts. Everybody confuses well-being and engagement and burnout and mental ill health and all these different and mental wellness and all these categories. So actually having some training programs or sessions, classes where you're helping create that alignment on language is one of the first steps. And it also gets people kind of excited once they start to learn the ins and outs of these concepts. So it starts to create some enthusiasm about the culture that you're looking to create. After you've educated the organization, the next part is evaluating. So this involves a few components. One is to properly measure engagement, well-being, and elements of the culture through a good survey. Now, I say measure because a good survey is really something that produces a score on these elements and then enables you to kind of benchmark these things year over year, as opposed to just, asking employees for a bunch of feedback. You've got to be able to properly measure these things so that then you can look at them against some of your KPIs and know if when you improved well-being or if when you reduced burnout, what did that do for your retention, right? So you've got to be able to put a proper numerical measurement on these things. Then I always suggest conducting qualitative interviews, interviewing some of your employees or interviewing people in different departments, getting a sense of what they're struggling with and combining those insights in order to put some of the stories behind the numbers. And that in and of itself will just give you so much insight into your culture. And then the last part of the evaluation is to evaluate your current programs, policies, and practices. That if you look at a well-being framework, and I have one that I always use where I kind of map out programs and policies against the different elements of well-being. So you get a sense of, what are you missing? Do you need to do more in financial well-being or social well-being? But really evaluating what you have in place, seeing if your policies need to be updated, things like that. Next is eradicate. So you want to make sure that you are eliminating any well-being barriers. So those are those elements of toxic culture, some of those burnout causes that I mentioned earlier. Because without doing that first, if you try to, go and, implement anything that's more forward thinking in well-being, any type of, programs or training and development efforts, anything like that, if you don't, first work on those barriers to well-being, things like people just having extremely high workloads or being expected to work, really anywhere more than 8 or 9 hours a day, those kinds of things will always be pulling you backwards. They'll always be working against any efforts that you put in place. So you've got to know what those barriers are, which should come out in your assessment or your evaluation, but really working on those elements of toxic culture first before doing anything else. And then empowering is now I put these 3 things for a reason, that developing your leaders, really helping your more senior level leaders become more conscious leaders, be more aware of their own kind of well-being. Proper development of those leaders makes such a huge difference in culture and how employees feel and whether employees want to stay with your organization, because they look to the leaders as their own kind of examples of what their future might be within the organization. So real development of leaders is so important. Training your managers. Managers are some of the most burned out people. I'm sure those of you in HR know that they are extremely burned out. So, before you invest in a meditation app, invest in your training your managers first, helping them understand how to manage people, but giving them what I call well-being training, teaching them how to have well-being conversations or have meetings that are more comprehensive in nature. So all of that's involved in training your managers, and then empowering your employees. So that's done through the various resources and programs, solutions, policies, anything that you have in place that, or classes even for your employees. So I always like to think about it at those three different levels. So again, this is a cycle because this is something that kind of has to keep happening. You as time goes on and the years go by, you kind of have to always be building, the business case consistently creating buy-in, extending your team of, well-being champions. And so it's really something that you have to do kind of every, couple of years or so. So don't get overwhelmed on it about, this whole process. Instead, think of it as something that's exciting for the organization to really roll up their sleeves on and work on, for the foreseeable future, knowing that well-being is truly the key to retention. And then I just want to end on this quote. Comes from an amazing book. If you really want to learn the ins and outs of workplace well-being, there's this book called Dying for a Paycheck, which I strongly recommend. But Jeffrey says, if we believe in the fundamental sanctity of human life, then we have a moral, ethical responsibility to improve well-being in the workplace. And I leave it at that because aside from all the business cases, and all the evidence that shows why well-being is important and why we need to get rid of burnout, aside from the fact that it's going to drive retention, we really just have to come back to the fact that work is a primary influencer on the lives of people. And if we don't take that influence seriously, we are quite literally, impacting people's lives, often for the worse, if we don't get this all under control. So that's it. Thank you. If you do want to get in touch with me, this is my email and my website. As I said, on my website, I have a workplace well-being snapshot assessment that's at the bottom of the homepage. And like I said, you can take it, download it and print it and share it with your leadership team and have a discussion. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about any of this, or if you would like me to help you with your own workplace well-being strategy. Obviously, that is what I do and I love to do. So please feel free to reach out. And thank you to HR Connect for having me.